All right, so we should be ready now. Now the study tonight, um, things not seen, and the target verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen, for the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. You know, the moment I saw the phrase, the things which are seen are temporal, that it reminded me of the Great Tribulation. It reminds me of the church, really. Because everything in the Bible ultimately is pointing back to the church, I believe. So, looking at the word temporal, the Greek word 4340 is the Strong's reference. It's the same word that is translated a while, for a time, and for a season. And that I think is interesting because in Matthew 13, verse 21, yet hath he no root, hath he not root in himself, but it dureth for a while. That's the same word. Dureth for a while, for when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, by and by he is offended. And then Mark 4, verse 17, and have not root in themselves, and so endure but for a time. Afterward, when affliction or persecution ariseth for the word's sake, immediately they are offended. And also Hebrews chapter 11, verse 25, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Now, what does that remind us of? That reminds you of anything? The idea of
Yes,
enjoying. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
at the time of tribulation, he was speaking about the times of a season.
Mm.
Hey, Dante.
Hey, how's it going,
Hello,
Floyd?
Cal.
Big Al, hi.
Going good.
Hi, welcome. Yeah, we're just getting started. Looking at a study tonight, a very short study actually, that I've labeled Things Not Seen. Looking at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. So the word season, a time, a while, is the same word temporal. What I believe is in view there is those that endure for a while. Now, what does it mean here when it says, uh, have no root in themselves and so endure but for a time? And then it says afterward. That word can also be translated a couple of different ways. The word then, when affliction or persecution ariseth for the word's sake. Now, if you look at this verse on the surface, it appears to be saying that the church, those in the church, they endured for a while. And then came the tribulation, right? In other words, they have no root in themselves, they endure for a while. And when persecution and affliction ariseth for the word's sake, immediately they are offended. Now, I thought about that, but I think, Lord willing, what's in view, God is not talking about prior to the tribulation. He is talking about the tribulation itself. They endure for a time. They endure in the tribulation, but they don't make it to the end. Does that make sense? So they endure.
Yeah.
They endure for a while. So the things that are seen are temporal, and what I'm gonna come back to eventually is that the things that are seen, it all has to do with the activities of Antichrist in the church, because the things that are seen, I think, Lord willing, we'll find ultimately is pointing to Christ. Okay. I'm sorry, the things that are not seen pointing to Christ, but the things that are seen, and if we look at some of the verses and the language in the Bible, it looks like it is talking about the activities of Antichrist in tribulation. Okay, so now with that said, take a look at Mark 13, verse 13. We're still looking at the tribulation. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake, but he that shall endure unto the end. What end is God talking about? What end?
Christ, he's the end.
Right, right. The end. Is this talking about a physical end? Those who would.
No.
Now, that's very important. I don't know how many times I've mentioned that. It is very, very important because that was a turning point for me by God's grace. It was a turning point coming to understand the nature of the judgment. When it says here, but he that shall endure unto the end, it's not talking about the end of the world. It's talking about the end of the church age. The end. Christ is the beginning and the end. So the end there is when the separation begins, the separation of wheat and tares, right? Matthew 24, verse 13. But he that shall endure unto the end. You see, in one way, I think, to understand that is to see that the enduring is the same, is relating to the church going through the fire. They're going through the great tribulation. But at the end of the tribulation is the separation. It is the end. Okay? So if you contrast that with the verses that I was offering just now, but endureth for a while, or so they endure but for a time, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. That season there, I believe he's talking about the Great Tribulation. And the sin that's in view is the apostasy of the church. Okay, so they endure, they enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season because they're not enduring. And that brings me back to what I said just now, that when we read here, the things which are seen are temporal. Well, it's temporary, not that the church waited the entire church age and then came into the Great Tribulation at that time. And the same thing, Matthew 13, verse 21, he hath not ruled in himself, but dureth for a while. That while there again, I believe it is pointing to the entire tribulation. The church comes into the Great Tribulation. I'm sorry, say again?
Right now.
The church comes into the Great Tribulation, and then the believers as well as the unsaved, remember wheat and tares, they're growing together until the harvest, right? So both the saved and the unsaved, both the elect as well as the unsaved church come into this time, come into this trial, this while. They endure, but they only endure for a season. In other words, the unsaved body, they do not endure unto the end. And that's what I think is in view here. James chapter 5, verse 11. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Endure what? Endure insult from your neighbor.
No.
Endure the people in the church speaking evil of you. Endure physical affliction in the world.
Doctrine.
Right? Hi, Donna.
Hi.
So those who endure, again, keep in mind that we have to be thinking spiritually. Those who endure, this is that period of time when God allows the corporate body to come into the Great Tribulation. And now it is a test. It is a test to see who is going to endure unto the end. Now, did the believers know that they were going through this test period?
No.
Did the church know? Did the unsaved body know? Did anyone in the church know? No. And when the Bible says, "But of that day and hour knoweth no man," that's what I believe is in view. In other words, the church, the whole body comes into the Great Tribulation unawares. Now there are those who endure, the believers. They endure not because of themselves, not because of what they know. They endure because at the end of the tribulation, God is revealed to them. Christ is revealed. And the scripture is unsealed. Those who do not endure, they endure for a while. They endure during this time, but they don't make it to the end. And so they end up under the judgment of God. All right, so these are the things that are temporal. Okay, so I'm proposing here that the word temporal is focusing on the Great Tribulation. What about the things that are seen? The things that are seen. What I believe is in view here is that Let's go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. And I mentioned earlier that eventually what I'm going to offer is that the things that are not seen, that's Christ. But Christ is not seen in tribulation, right? Christ is not seen in tribulation. Lamentations chapter 2, verse 14. Thy prophets have seen vain and foolish things for thee, and they have not discovered thine iniquity, to turn away thy captivity, but have seen for thee false burdens and causes of banishment. Jeremiah 14, verse 14. Then the Lord said unto me, the prophets prophesy lies in my name. I sent them not, neither have I commanded them, neither spake unto them. They prophesy unto you a false vision, see that? And divination, and a thing of naught, and the deceit of their hearts. John chapter 9, verse 41. Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. So what I'm proposing here, that the idea of seeing, anything that is seen is temporal. In other words, the church has a vision, a false vision of Christ in tribulation. And that's why the church does not endure unto the end. So the idea of those things that are seen, they're temporal, they're just passing away, that ties into a couple of other verses. For example, in 1 John chapter 2, verse 17, and the world passeth away and the lust thereof, but he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. Who are those that are doing the will of God? There's a separate study I offered. It's called Doing the Will of God. Now, many people, I think prior to May 21, remember when we were told that doing the will of God has to do with proclaiming that May 21 would be Judgment Day?
Yeah, I remember that quite well.
Yeah.
Isn't it keeping sound doctrine?
Well, yeah, it is keeping sound doctrine, but doing the will of God.
Those that do the will of God go through tribulation. They go to Babylon.
Exactly. They obey the command to endure. They obey the command to go to Babylon. God has a plan for them. They have to go through the great tribulation. I will bring the third part through the fire. Remember that? So that is the will of God. They have to be obedient to the fact that the tribulation comes, and everyone has to submit to the will of God when it comes to enduring tribulation. So the idea that, oh yeah, if you share a track and you go, we have to blow the trumpet about May 21. Those are that's not what I read in the Bible. Those that are doing, we have to allow the Bible to define the terms, right? So also we see in Psalm 90 verse 9, for all our days are passed away in thy wrath. We spend our years as a tale that is told. Psalm 102 verse 26, they shall perish, but thou shalt endure. Yea, all of them shall wax old like a garment, as a vesture shalt thou change them, and they shall be changed. Isaiah 40 verse 8, the grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever. Matthew 24:35, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. So the idea of the things that are temporal, the things that are just passing by, the things that are seen, I think God is giving us the picture of a physical world, right? In other words, the things that we come in contact with on a daily basis, and then we're looking at, but spiritually speaking, though, it is the church. Everything that the church has to offer, it is temporary. It is passing away. And it also coincides with those that are seeing, well, we see. When does that happen? Well, when the church comes into the great tribulation. False prophets and false Christ shall arise with signs and wonders. We see Antichrist more and more in tribulation. So these are the things that are temporal. These are the things that are passing away. These are the things that are seen. Okay, spiritually speaking. What about the things that are not seen? 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. While we look at the things which are seen, while we look not at the things which are seen, but the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. Take a look at Luke chapter 10, verse 24. For I tell you that many prophets and kings have desired to see those things which ye see, and have not seen them. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Right? The evidence of things not seen. So what is faith? Who is faith?
All right. Hey, Dante. This is Chris.
Chris, hi, welcome.
Hey, Chris.
Thanks for coming by.
Hello, man.
All right, and I see Patricia. All right, so we see here, we're looking at, I'm offering a few verses on the things that are not seen. And I'm offering here, first of all, faith. We all know who faith is, right? Faith.
Right.
Right. Faith is Christ. And look at that verse again. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So faith is not seen. In other words, we walk by faith, not by sight, correct? So the things that are not seen, they would have to relate to Christ. In Romans chapter 8, verse 25, but if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. When did the believers have to wait? When
After the tribulation.
believers had to endure the tribulation. They had to wait. They had to wait. They had to obey the command to go into Babylon. Everything revolves, I believe, ultimately, when it comes to the nature of judgment. Everything revolves. The focus is on what happened beginning in tribulation. But of that day and hour knoweth no man. So the tribulation comes unawares on both the wheat and the tares. Now the believers, they do the will of God. They do the will of God by being patient, by being obedient. Now, even though they don't realize it until what? Until the revelation of Christ. We look in hindsight and then we see, oh, by God's grace, it's only by the grace of God that today you and I would come to understand the nature of judgment. Now, prior to the revelation of Christ, I don't believe anyone, myself, you, or anyone, had a clue as to, for example, the verse that I offered earlier about those who endure unto the end. I'll bet you thought that God was talking about the end of the world, the very last day, right? And I'm offering here, no. Those who endure unto the end, these are the elect who came into the great tribulation, and they had to endure until the revelation of Christ. You see the entire book of Revelation, I propose, it is talking about things that are taking place today, even the idea of the coming of Christ. Now you might turn around and say, well, wait a minute, does this mean that Christ is not going to come? No, I can't say that. The problem, though, is those that are looking to the Bible and then interpreting verses in the Bible, trying to pinpoint or looking at verses as they relate to a physical end of the world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
If I could be corrected. Seeing is things that are carnal, and not seeing is the things that are spiritual that comes from God.
Yeah.
That could be.
Yeah, amen. I believe you're correct. The things that are seen are carnal, but carnal in a sense of how they relate to the church, how the church views things. For example, keep in mind that the whole idea of judgment is the fact that God unleashes false prophets. He unleashes Antichrist. Now, Antichrist, they don't come as the atheist. they don't come as someone who is opposed to Christ. They come looking like Christ. So that's why the danger is not out there. The danger when it comes to judgment is the very things that are happening in the church, in the body of Christ. Why? Well, because that's where the false prophets are going to multiply. And that's why it's very difficult today. If you try to share things in a church, you tell the pastor that God is judging the church and that there's no substance in the church, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. You're not going to be able to worship in that church, right? Now remember when Christ came, he came unto his own, and his own received him not. So anything and everything that we read about Judgment Day, it is focusing primarily, I believe, on the chaos, the apostasy of the church. Even though the church is saying, I am. Remember that verse also? Many shall come in my name and saying what? I am. Who is the great I am?
The Lord Jesus God.
Christ, yeah. So that tells you something. It tells you that judgment is all about the falling away, the apostasy, the lack of truth that we find not out there in the world, but in the church itself. Even though many in the church are convinced that somehow they are serving God, and that's scary if you think about it. All right, let me close with this conclusion. Unfortunately, here, I guess maybe we'll do it next time in a chat window. I think I could post some of these verses. So the things that are seen and the things that are not seen appears to be pointing to Christ himself as things seen and not seen. Wait a minute. In a temporal tribulation, the church is invaded by those who claim to be Christ, and therefore they say they see. However, they do not endure unto the end, and because of that, they come under the judgment of God. The believers, however, they focus on the things that are not seen, and spiritually speaking, that would be Christ. Now, Christ is not seen in tribulation. When is Christ seen? When do the believers see Christ? And I'm not talking about a physical vision. When do they see Christ?
That's the revelation of Christ.
Yeah, and where do we see that? We see it in the Word of God, because the Word is Christ.
The Word.
Christ is the Word. And God unseals the Bible so that we would understand what God is doing. We understand the nature of judgment. And that's when we see Christ. But prior, remember this whole context here that I'm offering, the things that are not seen is as we see the church coming into the Great Tribulation. Okay. Any questions?
This is the part that he said at the Last Supper, this is my blood and this is my body. It refers to his word that he gives spiritually to his believers.
Right. Well, yeah, he gave himself. Historically speaking, the fact that he went to the cross, he sacrificed himself. But yeah, and the Bible tells us that Christ is the Word. Christ is the Word. So anything that we see, everything that we see in the Bible, to the extent that we understand it, it is God who is providing revelation. All right, let me hang on one second. Yeah, did you have a question?
No.
All right, hold on. Let me turn off the recorder.